Everyone. Welcome to our second and, well, it's actually our third, I guess, talk by the esteemed Shirley Madill. Shirley is the executive director at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery, and she has also been past president of the Canadian Art Museums Directors Organization and past president of ICOM Canada. Shirley is an amazing art gallery director, and we're really looking forward to this talk about Anong's art in the context of Indigenous contemporary art. Just wanted to bring your attention to some current exhibitions at Shirley's Gallery, which is featuring at the moment an exhibit called Deanna Bowen, Black Drones in Hive, and works from the permanent collection. So welcome, Shirley. Very happy to have you here today. Thank you. I also wanted to let everybody know that the catalog of Anong's exhibit at Campbell House Museum is going to be available later this afternoon. We're going to put it up on the website. It is a downloadable PDF, or you can just page through it as a PDF. And so we're working on it right now. We're doing the very last edits, and everyone will be able to download it in today or tomorrow. And you're welcome. So welcome, Shirley. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello and good morning, everyone out there that I can't see, but thanks for joining in. I'm very pleased to be here, even though it's virtual, as part of the programming around Anong Migwans exhibition at Campbell House. I really enjoyed the tour that Elka gave. It was a nice journey into the house and look at the work. And it offered some insight into her work, and then it was followed by Anong's journey into her, paint making process, which I felt was truly mesmerizing. Recently, and I hope everyone can see the screen. Recently, land acknowledgements have become very prominent and noticeable across the country before meetings and events. And it's important to recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. And since time immemorial, First Nations have had this really intricate and respectful, spiritually and physically dependent, grateful and protective tie to the land. And the nature of this tie is not so much one of ownership, but one of stewardship. Traditional knowledge, languages, cultural practices, and oral traditions built up over the millennia are all connected to the land. It's more important than ever that that connection, that umbilical cord, is not severed. We all have a responsibility for the land and the sea and all the creatures that inhabit the land with them. So I'm speaking from my office at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery that's situated on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Neutral, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The Haldimand Tract, which is land promised to the Six Nations, includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. And for years, it's been a place of learning and sharing. So we are really grateful to live and work on this land that's been stewarded for thousands of years by Indigenous peoples. Now, in thinking about the invitation to speak, I thought that the best way to approach this presentation, given our time and also the breadth and depth of Indigenous art and artists in Canada and elsewhere, is probably to focus on a select number of artists whose practice is focused on the land in various ways. So here she is. This is an image that I discovered. It came from Indigenous Canada Tourism. And it's an image that really brings a great deal of calm to a person. I love this image. And I look at it and I wish I was sitting in that place, even if it's that cold. Where she's sitting is the Cup and Saucer Trail on Manitoulin Island, and it's the place that provides, the substance and heart of her work. And you can see she's surrounded, by land, and there's water and animals and birds all around her. So understanding that, it's really impossible probably to cover everything, I sincerely hope that I can do justice to the work of the Indigenous artists that I'm about to show, as well as providing a context for Anong Beam's work. Now, in the presentation, you're going to see that there's a generational shift in representation of some of the artists that I've chosen and their work. It's a very important element and factor in looking at the development of and practice of Indigenous art over the years. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Indigenous artists were taking a very powerful political stance in their work related to issues surrounding land and colonization. And it's certainly something that has not dissipated. It was amplified in 1992 when the Christopher Columbus celebrations were evident. And then it was amplified again in 2017 during Canada's sesquicentennial. And rightfully so. Many Indigenous artists were also exploring the spiritual and physical relationship with the land and addressed issues around ecology and environmentalism. These issues would have been climate change, the animal world, and spiritual connections with the land. So I wanted to begin with Anong's father, Carl Beam, who was a powerful, internationally acclaimed contemporary Canadian artist. And I'm truly grateful for Anne's talk because she provided so much more personal insight into Carl Beam and his vision. And her introduction was this wonderful window into his practice and his exploration of natural pigments that I was certainly not aware of before. So in 1986, the North American iceberg, this piece by Carl Beam that you see on the screen, became known as the first work by a First Nations artist to be purchased by the National Gallery of Canada for the collection of contemporary art. And it opened the door for a new generation of First Nations artists to enter those hallowed halls. His Columbus project was also an immense body of work which challenged historically dominant assumptions and re-examined the meaning of Columbus's arrival in North America and its long-term repercussions for the Indigenous peoples of the Americas. And other works that he produced explored plant communication and food and shelter. And he was also studying closely the relationship between humans and their environment and employed a masterful combination of diverse iconography in his work, which you can see in this iconic painting. The Columbus Suite distills a larger body of work by him that was created in advance of the quincentenary of the celebrated, landfalls in the Americas. This series was composed of 12 etchings. They were produced in his studio, and it began with this piece called The New World, which you see here, and it's a turtle, which of course is the totem for the North American continent, and the stencil title and the veil of drips that are really punching home the urgency of what followed in the images that were the rest of the suite. Now, Carl Beam was really renowned for working with photography and collage in an aesthetic style that probably was more akin to the kind of layering of the pop artist Robert Rauschenberg than traditional forms of what we call the woodland school painters, such as Norval Morrisseau. But Carl Beam's art really engaged his traditions through a recognition of the important role of place. And this is really, reflected in Anong's discussions of her upbringing and, the influences of her parents on her work. So the connection to the land, I would say the construction of the Adobe home on Manitoulin Island, and certainly her mother's Anne Beam's vessels reveal that close connection to the land. The Adobe house that Carl and Anne Beam built used local earth. It was a building material to create what you call an artificial cave in harmony with its environment. The nature of Adobe as a building material dictates to a great degree its aesthetic form and characteristics. The forms are organic, simple, and rounded, often molded by hand. And the house became, to a certain extent, a large-scale project, which evolved naturally out of their earlier experiences with, Native American pottery and the building vernacular of the American Southwest. And this time period also coincided with their increasing concern for environmental and cultural problems, including worldwide hunger and housing shortages. Now, a key figure and a contemporary of Carl Beam, a change agent in contemporary art, is Robert Hoole. And I don't think that any discussion would be full without mention of this important artist. He's played a very important role in bridging the gap between contemporary First Nations artists and the broader Canadian art scene through his writing and his involvement in really important high-profile exhibitions such as Land, Spirit, Power, First Nations at the National Gallery of Canada. His essay, which is an iconic essay, The Spiritual Legacy of the Ancient Ones, in this remarkable project is a must read. If you haven't read it, please do. It's an incredible work of art in itself. Now I'm going to talk about one specific work, and this work is Where the Gods Are Present. It was done in 1989, and it was produced during a residency at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. Now I worked at the Winnipeg Art Gallery during this time. I was there for 20 years, and this was also the place that I became very familiar with the works of Carl Beam and Bob Boyder and Robert Hoole, among many other artists. And the residency experience for Robert Hoole allowed him to explore and reconnect with his Plains identity. He was living in Toronto. He is basically from the Sandy Bay Reserve in northern Manitoba. The work consists of what you see here, 4 large abstract paintings. Each one is named after the apostles, Matthew, Philip, Bartholomew, and Thomas, in that order. And they're derived from sketches from a previous work that was Parflesh's for the Last Supper. And the production was the means of reappropriating and reclaiming Manitoba as Indigenous land and uniting Christian and Indigenous beliefs and traditions. The Parflesh is the source of inspiration, not only aesthetically, but also in terms of meaning. Now, I thought I would put in an example of an early Crow Parflesh. Parfleshes are rawhide containers, and they have been embellished by painting, incising, or both. You'll see that they're envelope shaped. They've historically been used to contain items such as household tools or foods. Their designs may have even served as maps, and in contemporary usage, they may carry social, spiritual, and symbolic meaning, or be even part of the dance or parade regalia. The bags are usually decorated with this distinctive style of graphic artwork. Sometimes they symbolize landscape features such as rivers and mountains. And historically, women were the main creators of parfleshes. And the first how they were produced was they would stretch out the raw hides and then they painted them with natural pigments that were drawn from nature, in the way that Anong also draws her pigments from nature, and then shaping the raw hide into the final form. So when you look closer at the paintings, you'll see that line that divides the two areas of the paintings ever so subtly. And in his previous work, Robert Hoole actually did use natural pigments. He was experimenting with natural pigments. And he was also drawn to the work of the New York abstract artist Barnett Newman, specifically intrigued as to how Newman was very specific about his colors being spiritual. With Barnett Newman, it wasn't any red that was used. It was a very specific red. So during his residency at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, he painted in the basement, and it was in one of the studios, and it was February. It was one of the coldest Februaries ever encountered in Winnipeg, I remember. And he encountered challenges mixing his colors due to the fact that there was no natural light in the basement of the gallery. And so he's a spiritual colorist, and color is very critical to his methodology. So to gain distance, he took a break and he traveled by bus north to Elphinstone, Manitoba to visit his brother-in-law. And during his journey, he was really struck by this barren landscape that exists between Portage la Prairie and his destination, where the demarcation between an earth and sky, for example, on a prairie landscape in the middle of winter practically disappears. I've encountered that. It gives the appearance of a very monochromatic, flat, two-dimensional wall. And so he shared his challenges with his painting in this kind of windowless space with his family. And a relative pointed out to him that there is color in the snow. So when he returned to Winnipeg, he mixed his colors under the skylight on the third floor of the gallery, and these 4 monumental abstract paintings were the result. And they are sourced from the local natural environment, the red, blue, and ochre, and green. And it's a very vibrant response to the earth and light and sky of Manitoba's prairie landscape. And although they make allusion to the landscape, he doesn't consider them landscape paintings. He actually considers them landscapes for the mind, and they actually derive their name and their spirit from a natural phenomenon that is near his childhood home. And it became legend, and it's really the object of pilgrimage for the Indigenous people of the area and part of the mythology with which he grew up. Now, I thought I'd just talk about place again, because this is a recurrence, that occurs in much of the work that I am going to show you, and also within that context of Anong's work as well. Now, the sacred place that is embodied in the paintings refers to a spiritual center for the Saulteaux, and it's a place from which the province of Manitoba actually gets its name. The Anishinaabe referred to Manitowapa, or Manitoba, the meeting of the 4 directions. And there's a specific spot on a narrow stretch of a lake where the current ebbs and flows. And as the water hits this limestone, this porous limestone on the shore, it makes this muffled drone resembling the sound of faraway drums. And it creates the sound of what the Indigenous people refer to as our ancestors, and it's believed to be the voice of Manitou. And to the Anishinaabe, Manitou refers to the Great Spirit or Creator. And it's also, this sacred place is also a power place where many travel on vision quests to seek renewal, offer tobacco. And for the Saulteaux, the Narrows are also known as Manitowaban, meaning the divine straits, or where the gods are present. Now, Bob Boyer's work was he was perhaps best known for being politically charged in his blanket paintings that incorporated traditional symbols and icons from traditional Métis and Cree heritage. In his later works, he discovered a kind of spiritual calm and happiness where he used natural pigmented colors and mixed media and graphic elements. I wasn't able, because of the copyright issues, to get permission to have reproductions of his work. So I was able, though, to utilize these covers from 2 publications to show the breadth and the distance from one work to another. So his innovative use of traditional symbols and icons expressed in a very sophisticated contemporary painting style had really brought him to the forefront of Indigenous image making. And as a First Nations artist, her work and politics were interrelated. He later chose actually to depart from the political forum and take a more personal and spiritual relationship with his culture and his environment. So the references to earlier work that remain are elements that are also an inherent part of the Plains Indigenous culture that speak to his heritage. So I have this other to the later works that he did prior to his death. In these later works, he was incorporating a technique, fresco, his whole interest in the history of technical processes with applying pigment to a surface and what would happen. And it's a very painstaking process, fresco. It forces an artist to work really simply, reduce complexity and patterns, and rely on structure. And it allowed him to move away from this blanket series and take his art making in a new direction. So his love at that time was surface texture, color was really important, and the works, regardless of scale, were very freer and elemental. And the intent of his works was to take the images to the place of the spirit. Now, another great loss to the community, we've lost Carl Beam and we lost Bob Boyder and now Mike McDonald, is the Mi'kmaq artist Mike McDonald. And his early work in video was connected to the land in British Columbia, addressing clear cutting, ocean life, animals, and he gradually moved to garden projects such as this one called Planting One Another. Now, the image that you see is actually a recreation of one of McDonald's works. It's a twin replanting of a medicine and butterfly garden. One planting here at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery, and another planting was in Brantford. Now, what's at the Woodland Cultural Center? I was trying to remember, yes, it's at the Woodland Cultural Center. Now, it's comprised primarily of plants that are indigenous to the Americas. And what Mike McDonald had done in the early 1990s was he created gardens to make space for contemplation and to invite slow looking and interaction with medicine plants. And over 5 years, from the late 1980s to the early 1990s, he would record testimony and created visual documents for the Gitscan during their land claim challenges. And he was on location doing a video shoot near Kitwanga, BC, and it was an area that was threatened by clear-cut logging. And his encounters with the butterflies inspired his understanding of their connection to medicine plants and to healing. And this was the seed of his numerous in situ butterfly gardens that he created between 1995 to 2003 across the country. So there was a garden at Presentation House in North Vancouver, Mount St. Vincent Gallery in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The Winnipeg Art Gallery, certainly had one. And the Indigenous curator, Lisa Myers, worked with us to do this recreation of a medicine and butterfly garden. And it's also interesting to note that Robert Houle, for example, is currently studying the medicinal plants. And then I'm moving to more of the West Coast of Lawrence Paul's work. And I always have trouble pronouncing the last name, so most will refer to him as Lawrence Paul. His paintings employ elements of the Northwest Coast form and line design, and you'll see aspects of surrealism, but his issues, in particular during this time, explored issues environmentalism, like this watching white man to fix hole in the sky, land ownership, and also Canada's treatment of First Nations peoples. Now, the entire Canadian landscape tradition, as we know, is used as an archive for him. He uses it to construct a counter-narrative to the familiar one that links possession of the landscape with the construction of a national identity. This national identity best was probably propagated by the Group of Seven, though in a more general sense, he takes issue with the popular myth that Canada was carved out of a wilderness. In this world, in his world, the land is never seen as unseen or unlived in. To make it so means dispossession for his people. So unlike Group of Seven works, his landscapes will always be populated with figures who are usually engaged in activities that express their relationship to the land. One history to which his paintings bear witness then is this dark and pathological underside of national identity. And then he combines these stylistic conventions of surrealist and Haida art, and has the effect of flattening the distance between two very opposing views. Now, Anishinaabe artist Rebecca Bellmore in the early 1990s stressed making art that would spark conversation between Indigenous people and the Canadian government, something that would help her people speak for themselves. At the Banff Center in 1991, she sketched plans for a giant megaphone to serve as a mouthpiece, and Bellmore's purpose was to use the sculpture to speak to the land. Speaking to Their Mother is very large sculpture work. It's actually 6 feet wide, 7 feet long, and it's made entirely out of all organic materials. The conical shape further amplifies the megaphone. Now this work, if you've ever had a chance to see it, we were able to bring it in a couple of years ago to the gallery. When you get close to this work, you're very acutely aware of the natural elements it is made of. It becomes very much alive. Before Bellmore actually spoke into the megaphone, this sculpture was carried through the woods and assembled in a meadow near Johnson Lake in the Bow Valley. Her words echoed through the mountains and, she hoped, reached Mother Earth. The piece was a response to the Oka crisis of 1990, which was a protest against a proposed golf course on Mohawk territory in Quebec. But after its 1991 debut at the Between Views and Points of View exhibition at the Walter Phillips Gallery, the work was used to address the land at political demonstrations from coast to coast. This work stopped at reserves and significant sites. She encouraged the local community to address the land through her megaphone in their own language. This piece is well-traveled, having spoken to a clear-cut forest, Indigenous land claims, and even making it as far as Parliament Hill. And now for the next section, where we're entering another generation of Indigenous artists. And I'm just going to start with one work by Kent Munkman. At the center of most of his work, and I know it's a broad range of performances and, you know, the two-spirit individual, but at the center of most of his work is the land and the colonization and a whole revisionist look at the history of the art history and the canon of art history in representations of the landscape. And his purpose is the concept of more of a shared land, addressing treaties and also the Cree concept of welcome. So in this work, in The Impending Storm, you'll see two figures that are on the left. One is an Indigenous figure and the other is a white European. And they are seen fleeing together from this really dark, ominous cloud that's hovering over the landscape, which is a landscape inspired by American painter Albert Bierstadt, who did these monumental landscape paintings in terms of scale. And again, like the Group of Seven with no individuals or figures in it. The Impending Storm is actually part of a series of paintings that Munkman refers to interchangeably as the moral landscape or Eros and Empire. And the storm is used as an allegory for the end of innocence and an impending doom of civilization that's about to encroach on an Indigenous existence. But rather than portraying these two subjects in opposition or rivalry, the painting for Munkman was intended as a vehicle for reconciliation through a love story. And the story is conceived as a metaphor for the entwined histories and relationships between white settlers and Indigenous peoples. What is significant here in terms of the subject of land is by adapting the painterly conventions of romantic 19th century landscape artwork, such as this one, and then fusing fact and fiction and projecting his own stories upon landscapes that are sites of contact and contention. Meryl McMasters, she works primarily in photography, although there's a performative element within her works, and her self-portraitures explore identity, representation, storytelling, and the environment. And she stages elaborate scenes with costumes and makeup that invite the viewer to think about how identity is constructed and explore one's own relationships with the land and cultural concepts. Dreamcatcher, which is here, and also lead me to places that I could not find on my own. This is actually part of a series that's actually called As Immense as the Sky, and it consists of self-portraits shot against the Canadian landscape. The images involve elaborate costumes, props, and sculptures. Many of them are actually constructed from natural materials that are gathered from the land, from the natural environment, all used to explore the intersection of her Cree and European heritage. And the props constructed directly from foraging from the landscape. So most of all the props that she's wearing are actually taken from the landscape, itself. She's a forager. Now, two other artists that I wanted to put here, different work in terms of their exploration. For Christy Belcourt, it's truly about where she lives, and you think about the wisdom of the universe. This is her knowledge of the land. It's not of a beautiful landscape that you look out and you see horizon line, etc., but rather it's more about what she refers to as local Indigenous knowledge. It harkens also to the work of another artist, Colleen Kuchal. She had an exhibition at the Winnipeg Art Gallery in 1996 called House Made of Stars, and her work focused on the Lakota creation mythology and sacred themes of time and space. And so this mythology is reaching out into more of, I would think, the cosmology and the universe and maybe the solar system. Now, I also want to talk about just briefly the work of Lindsey Dauben. Her practice, and it's a very interesting practice as she refers to it as one of deep listening. Dauben describes her practice as place responsive, deeply rooted in collaboration with the land. Recent works like this include Listenership, in which the artist built an outdoor studio of found wood in the forest outside the Banff Center during their Indigenous Visual and Digital Arts residency in January 2016. It was made in snowy -30-degree weather in less than a week's time. Listenership illustrates her willful commitment in making work in tune with the elements. She invited guests to the studio to sit together and hear the land. The land holds incredible knowledge that is often drowned out by the noises of everyday life and industry. The ship provides a space to actually spend time with the land and one another in the important act of simply listening. Anagaris is an interdisciplinary artist, and she describes her methodology as potlatch, and it's a ceremony of reciprocation and nation building. She enacted these strategies of her connections to the land with the goal of transferring concepts and knowledge to the viewer so that they can contemplate ideologies related to the land beyond the white cube of the gallery. Focused on transferring knowledge about notions of land, as well as bridging the Toronto and Tahltan territory, she creates actually what's called a material library of rocks, copper, ceramics, construction, orange, mirror, and obsidian, materials that reference her Tahltan home. And this library and the performance which activates them affirms her relationship to the land, the materials within it, and the people. Melissa General, each of her works are made on and reference to her connection with Six Nations of the Grand River territory. As a Six Nations member currently living in Toronto, General centers her practice on connection to place and relationship to land. In this work, the place where I come from, she examines the constant pull she feels to return home. What you're seeing here, and it's also performance in the video on its own, she's unearthing a long bolt of red cloth that she's buried. She wrapped herself in the cloth. She's breathing in connection with the knowledge that's held in the land. And the series of photographs that make up the work, you know, there's the video and the photographs and the performance, show General wrapped in the cloth, standing among the bushes, which is the land of her ancestors. As she smells and feels and sees the land, she activates its memories and its knowledge, acknowledging those who call her back to her home and Six Nations. In another work, and this work now is actually in our collection at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery. It's a video and a photograph. It encompasses water and the importance of water. And I think of Anne's paintings a great deal when I'm looking at Melissa's work, particularly, you know, the Manitoulin Island being surrounded by water, and certainly the water's, you know, influence and reference in her work. Rivers have a conveyance and a way of delivering items, people, and perhaps other, you know, infusions. And so her installation and the performance involves the action where she is actually collecting and carrying water from the Grand River that runs through her home territory. And the volume and the constant flow of the river echo her, you know, persistence and urgency that she brings to the task. It appears as something that could be entirely futile. She's bottling the water in her mother's mason jars and carrying them to the front. So the impulse to gather this water suggests a need to access and protect something that's contained within the river. And what's contained within the river is, you know, memories and histories and knowledge, and perhaps those that are based on Haudenosaunee cosmology. The knowledge of clan matriarchs and creation stories are all related to land and water. And now contained and sealed in her mother's mason jars, the water's appearance can continue to change. So the filled jars are really documents of her connection to her community on the river, and how knowledge is passed through her mother and the river water. Now, Megan Mousseau, this is a video installation, and this explores her connection to the land that is now called Newfoundland, and the tensions of belonging that exist in First Nations communities on the island, recounting oral knowledge and stories passed down to her by her grandmother and other family members. Mousseau narrates footage of her walking on the land. The land holds her family stories. Mousseau's installation examines the ways in which knowledge and also familial knowledge constitute belonging outside of colonial identity. And we are coming near to the end. I think I have a couple of artists that I want to end with. One is Tanya Willard, whose installations occur in the natural environment. And I'm going to focus actually on this one. This was an installation among 5 works in the exhibition at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery that was held during the summer, during COVID, which was called Soundings, an exhibition in 5 parts. And the exhibition was curated outside thinking in Candace Hopkins and Candace Hopkins is one of the curators, but the exhibition was actually organized originally with the Agnes Etherington Art Center in Kingston. And it explored how score could be a tool for colonization. And it featured performances, new scores, videos, and sculptures and sound by Indigenous and other artists who respond to this question. And Indigenous land and territory are at the heart of Willard's works. And in this particular work, it included a performance. It included the seating for the performance. It included beadwork. There was video and sound. So at the center of the piece is this large metal fire pit that you see. And there's an intricate pattern on the fire pit that's based on Anishinaabe beadwork, and it was cut out of the sides of the metal bowl with torches. And on the wall behind was a graphic that was adhered to the wall in vinyl. And this was a musical score, and I'll show that in a minute. It has the same dimensions. Let's see, there it is. It has the same dimensions as a face cord of firewood. It's 4 feet high and it's 8 feet long. So Willard's score was inspired by the firewood that was piled outside her home in the interior of British Columbia, her territory. And with her dad's help, she cuts and piles that wood. And the graphic score is made of an image that was redrawn from the wood piles. So it's wood stacked up that you can see in the image. And then the spaces between the stacked wood have these marks that could be interpreted as a score and musical score. I'm just going to go back, and here's where part of the performance, was held where the fire pit was used. And then ending with Joanne Linkletter. Forever, this is a text-based, site-specific works that responds to various aspects of its location. It's drawing from unattributed Indigenous words spoken during the making of treaties. As long as the sun shines, the river flows, and the grass grows, the work poetically reflects Canada's conflicted past, charged present, and future post-colonial situation. The text referred that treaties will last as long as these elements continue to live on. So I want to end by huge gratitude to Anong, for her work. By immersing oneself in her work, particularly a work like the Deluge, and I realize that there's two Deluge paintings, it seems really embedded within that primordial spiritual power of Manitoulin Island. And it's inevitable that nature would make up so much of her subject matter, given her environment and her experiences with her parents, their work, and also their view of the world. And looking at, the tour that Elke gave, the paintings, the flower works, as well as, thinking about organic forms of her ceramic pieces and this new direction that she's now taking with the sculptural objects really resonate with this connection to the land. And even her use of the images of plants have a twofold significance. Plants do have spiritual significance as well as medicinal. And like some artists, foraging into the landscape where the use of material is actually part of the work. I haven't had the opportunity to be at Campbell House, given the COVID situation and just being here at the gallery, other than the walkthrough. But I do want to let you know, I did see submerged landscapes at the Station Gallery, and it was this incredible, beautiful immersion into color and this complex layering of iconography that's even seen in this work. And it's at once personal, but yet it's also universal. And I can only identify, this feeling of immersion in her work. Is it landscape painting? I'm not sure. You could describe it as simply as that, but it's definitely a spiritual connection to the land, and it's an immersion into it in such a way that it becomes a part of you, giving a person a very powerful sense of place. So in viewing Anong Beam's work, causes me, but it causes us to think about what the land means to us and our relationship with it. And I know that after seeing her show, I certainly saw things differently. So thank you. And certainly if you have any questions, hopefully I can answer them.
If anyone wants to put questions in the chat, I can answer them from the chat too. Okay, no questions? Well, thank you, Shirley. Thank you so much. That was lovely. Really, really really great walk through contemporary Indigenous art. I didn't know a number of the artists, so